When most people think of an outlaw, the names Billy the Kid, Jesse James, Doc Holliday, and Butch Cassidy are probably the first names that come to mind. But despite the fame of these male criminals, the women on this list of notorious female outlaws hold their own when it comes to criminal behavior. The women on this list are very different from the helpless dames typically portrayed in Western films, and you'd be quite unfortunate to cross one of them in a dark alley. I'm Jake the Voice Par, and these are the 5 most notorious female outlaws. Born to a middle-class family, this famed stagecoach robber's life went from American dream to American nightmare after she fell in love with a gambler named Frederick Hart. The couple eloped shortly after meeting. Hart watched as her husband repeatedly lost all his wages at the poker table. He was also a notorious drinker and often abusive. Over the next several years, Hart gained enough courage to leave her husband and give birth to their son sometime later. The couple eventually reunited and she started drinking and taking drugs. When she became pregnant again, Hart knocked his wife unconscious before departing for good. Pearl left her 2 children with her mother before heading to Arizona to work in the mining camps. Her next love interest, Joe Boot, introduced her to the first taste of real criminal activity. She would lure men in with the promise of some hanky-panky, then Joe would knock the men out and rob them. They decided they weren't making enough money with this scam and planned to rob a stagecoach for a more profitable heist. The heist was a flop as the couple was caught the same night. Pearl weaseled her way out of a conviction by flirting with the jury. Boot was sentenced to 20+ years. The judge was so angry that he got a new jury and charged her with illegally carrying a gun. The second jury sentenced Hart to 5 years in jail, but her flirtatious ways worked to her benefit as the warden allowed her to entertain visitors in her jail cell, and she was offered larger cell accommodations. She was paroled after 3 years in prison. If the thought of getting married and settling down scares you, the tale of Sally Skull isn't going to ease your nerves. Skull married her first husband, Jesse Robinson, in 1833. The couple had 2 kids and divorced in 1843. Less than 2 weeks after her first marriage ended, she married George Haight Skull. They spent the next several years fighting her ex-husband over custody of their 2 kids. Sally allegedly kidnapped her kids more than once to keep them from Robinson. In 1849, her second husband disappeared, and Skull claimed that he had died. 3 more marriages followed. Her third husband disappeared shortly after they were married, and she divorced her 4th husband. Further stories of her exploits indicate that she was a cattle rustler who flirted with married men and rode off with their best horses to sell. Some reports indicate that Sally even shot more than one man who crossed her. In May of 1866, she faced charges of lying under oath, but the jury acquitted her. Sometime later, she disappeared for good. Historical reports suggest that her last husband killed her for her money and buried her in a shallow grave. This former prostitute turned member of the Wild Bunch gang had a love life that strongly resembled a season of 90210. Her on-again, off-again relationships with William Carver and Ben Kilpatrick, both members of outlaw gangs, led her to an early life of crime. Lawmen suspected that she even dressed up as a man and participated in at least 1 train robbery. Part of her job as a member of the Wild Bunch gang was to sell stolen goods to help fund the crew's exploits. When she was arrested in 1901 for forgery, she had $8,500 worth of stolen notes, the equivalent of more than $200,000 today, in her possession. By 1918, she finished sowing her wild oats and moved east to work as a seamstress under a fake identity. She died of heart disease in 1961. Historians widely consider her the last surviving member of the Wild Bunch gang. To answer the question of nature versus nurture, the case of the Barker Carpris gang seems to fall squarely into the nurture camp. Kate "Ma" Barker had a hand in creating one of the most notorious outlaw gangs in history. There is some speculation to how much she participated in the numerous kidnappings and murders committed by the gang, though at the very least she appeared to have been more than accepting of her children's illegal activities. She regularly played the distraught mother card to get her sons released from jail, and her husband, the boys' father left the family after he claimed to have no control over his wife or the kids' behavior. The gang spearheaded bank robberies, murder, car theft, and kidnapping. Their final murder led to the gang's downfall. Following a successful kidnapping, the gang assassinated one of their members, George Ziegler, who was active in planning their activities, but who also had loose lips. Investigators used information found on Ziegler's body to identify members of the gang. Officers located Ma and Fred, her favorite son, hiding in a Florida cottage. Ma, who manned a machine gun, and Fred held their ground for 4 hours in a police shootout. The two both died in the following shootout. Our list wouldn't be complete without the female half of the infamous outlaw duo Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty during their 2-year reign of terror. They terrorized small businesses and banks in multiple states and murdered several people, including law enforcement officials. Their foray into criminal life began when her boyfriend, Clyde Barrow, went to prison for auto theft. Bonnie smuggled a gun into his jail cell and he used it to escape. He was recaptured but paroled 2 years later. The couple is tied to at least 15 bank robberies, where Bonnie sometimes acted as the getaway driver. Despite their reputation, the couple preferred to release their prisoners, though when concerned, Clyde wasn't shy about murder. Reports tie the couple to the deaths of at least 14 law officials, including 2 motorcycle cops who unwittingly stumbled on their location. A few months later, Bonnie and Clyde went down in a literal hail of bullets in an outlaw by law enforcement. Ironically, it seems that Bonnie predicted their deaths sometime earlier in a poem she wrote. Someday they'll go down together and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief. But it's the death for Bonnie and Clyde. For more top lists just like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out our other top lists. Thank you very much for watching and thanks for learning.